I think we are. All right. Cool.
Okay, we are ready. We didn't do our technology prayer, that's why it's taken a little bit longer. Now, this is a good segue because you heard Karen talk very briefly about XR technologies, and I'm really keen to hear what Scott's got to say in terms of this area, being a bit of a AR, VR, XR, MR nut. Dr. Scott Hollier is here today to talk about, now correct me if I've got this wrong, XR user requirements, W3C work on mixed reality accessibility.
That's
Over to Dr. Scott Hollier.
No worries. Thanks very much, David. Good morning, everyone, and it is wonderful to be here at OZeWAI and to have OZeWAI in Perth. So thank you, everyone, for coming over. It's a truly wonderful thing to have everyone here. So today I'm going to be talking a bit about, as David said, the XR user requirements, explaining a bit about the W3C work in the accessible platform architecture, as Karen was saying. And yes, the timing is perfect because when I put in this presentation, I was hoping that, something's happened. There we go. It's good technology day today. I was hoping to have the chance to share this with you, and a lot of the call for consensus and approvals just went through last week, so the timing's been really good. Just for people who don't know me, I'm a digital access specialist, co-founder of the Centre for Accessibility Initiative. Wear a few different hats. I teach the Professional Certificate in Web Accessibility course through UniSA, and for this presentation I'm talking about the W3C hat I wear, and I'll take a breath as I read out the acronyms. The W3C WAI APA RQTF is the group that I'm a part of. So to take the last few of that, in the Accessible Platform Architecture group, we have a task force, the Research Questions Task Force, and essentially our group is like an advanced scouting party where we look at what technology is coming up and aim to consider its accessibility implications. Before getting into the presentation itself, I just want to say a huge thank you to OZeWAI and the accessibility community. Many of you will be aware that last year we tried hosting Australia's first Access Awards to celebrate the great work being done by individuals and organisations throughout the country, and it was a wonderful celebration of the good work that's going on out there. We received 71 nominations across the categories, and winners included organisations like Coles, ANZ, the ABC, and Jan Wild was our Accessibility Person of the Year. So wonderful to have so much support. OZeWAI provided a significant amount of support, both in involvement and financial, and it made a huge difference. So thank you to the community. We will be doing it all again very soon, and we'll have more to say about this on Global Accessibility Awareness Day in May. So in terms of today's presentation itself, I want to discuss about what we've called the OZeWAI. It sounds a bit like some sort of evil supervillain, but it stands for the XR Accessibility User Requirements. And essentially, what the OZeWAI is about is to try to provide guidance to industry about how mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality can provide support to the accessible needs. As Karen just mentioned, this work has only just been approved, and I don't think the complete up-to-date link is online yet, and it'll have a more official launch at CSUN, but Judy Brewer did say that we could have this discussion today, which is really exciting, and I'll provide the link to this information afterwards. So I figure probably a good place to start is, what is XR? And Karen touched on it briefly, but essentially when we talk about XR, we're talking about everything that sort of comes under that immersive environment. So virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and different platforms and devices on which that can run. So as you can appreciate, there's a lot happening in this space. It's a very fast moving space at the moment. So it's really important to make sure that as we do go through the processes of really cutting edge, leading edge, and in some cases bleeding edge technologies, that we make sure that accessibility is a part of that. That's really been the purpose of the work we've been doing. So it's worth asking then the question, well, how does this relate to people with disability? And there's been a few good research projects recently that showcase some of the benefits. For example, there's been some good prototypes of people with vision impairment and also intellectual disabilities making use of augmented reality environments as they go down the street and need some assistance. There is in real-time conversion of what people are seeing into information that can be better presented to screen readers, and also having people be able to be there with them on the journey to be able to provide that support from a remote location. So we're seeing a lot of great applications in this space in that regard. And we're also seeing some great support around captioning. So for example, if a hearing impaired person goes to a shop and the shopkeeper is speaking to them, then those words can appear as captions in real time in that augmented reality device. And also, what if you are in a virtual environment, an XR environment, and you would like to continue using the aids that you use in your real life? So for example, I use a cane to get around. What if I would like to continue using my cane in virtual reality? Is there support for that? Well, that's another research project that's been explored so that I can take my virtual cane and tap around my virtual environment to navigate if that's the way I'd like to go. The thing though is that the space is changing extremely quickly, and as I touched on in my debate yesterday in a more fun way, there has been some great new interesting developments happening. And at the Consumer Electronics Show last month, which is the world's biggest showcase of new products coming out, about 40,000 products were on display. One that particularly caught my attention was NextMind, which is the ability to control games just by thinking about them. And so I've got a brief video here just to show you a little demonstration. I'll explain for people who are vision impaired. There's a person using the NextMind device, and essentially they are controlling what options they select and how to interact with the game simply by just thinking about it. And they can select options, take out the enemies, and do it with quite
the next teleporter is active.
Of effectiveness.
You can move on. Perfect. No enemy. The extraction point is not far away.
So it's a fair thing to say then that if we have the ability to use all these technologies and even potentially our mind to navigate around XR environments, then what the implications are for people with disability is quite profound. Certainly if you can use a whole variety of different inputs and outputs to achieve those tasks, then that is something that is really, really exciting and has huge potential for people with disability. So to try and provide advice in this rapidly changing space, we have created the OZeWAI to ensure that there is some guidance through W3C that will assist developers in considering accessibility, both from a use case perspective and also solutions to those to the issues likely to arise in that supportive role. So the OZeWAI features 18 use cases to try to highlight particular scenarios and how those scenarios can be addressed. Certainly when it comes to inputs and outputs, there's a lot of different options available, and but at the moment there is a number of barriers that are really holding back. And it's interesting, there's a lot of parallels between, as Karen was saying, game development and how it's taken a while to get accessibility to gaming, and we're starting to see history repeating a little bit in the XR space. So, for example, if you ever want to see some great and hilarious YouTube videos, search for Just Bad Games. The Reres channel will have really good insights. And one of the ones that they often go for is that when the Nintendo Wii first came out in 2006, everyone went, hey, this console's got motion control. Let's make everything motion control. And as a result, because games focus so heavily on motion control, often they were very tedious and difficult to use. And we're starting to see that happen in the XR space as well. And we're seeing a reliance on the gestures and motion controls. And despite the controller still being so important, we're seeing that sometimes you can't get accessibility to the controller because too much is focused on motion control and vice versa. So that's certainly one big issue that's a barrier to XR at the moment for people with disability. We're also seeing a lot of proprietary companies, so there's very little communication between different companies, the HTC Vive and the PlayStation VR, Pokemon Go even. The crossover between what accessibility options are there, how the standardisation of a feature set is still something that's some way off. When we do look at our everyday consumer devices like Android, iOS, Windows, Mac, we see a pretty consistent feature set. We see screen readers, magnifiers, closed caption support, switch key support. We're seeing a consistency of those assistive technologies. But in the gaming space, we're just starting to see this come through more. We're starting to see caption videos becoming quite common, high contrast themes, a few accessibility features, customizable controls. But in the XR space, it's still a bit of the Wild West. There's a lot of different implementations and very proprietary. And also a big issue is regarding audio accuracy. For those who are unaware, Vitya does some work with binaural sound, and also there's no restriction really on how many speakers we can put around someone's head in an XR device. So we could potentially have huge accuracy when it comes to audio placement, but that is still something that's quite hit and miss. So these are some of the barriers as this technology emerges. There's a number of different ways we can have inputs and outputs. Certainly in terms of inputs, we can make sure that there is a speech input, keyboard input, eye tracking, and certainly the controller is still a big factor. When it comes to outputs, basically our 5 senses can all be used. It might seem odd to think of things like taste and smell as being a part of our experiences, but certainly in an AR context, we could make a lot of use of that. So if we're walking down the street and walking past a bakery, for example, that would be quite helpful in that smell, knowing in terms of navigation and understanding where we are. But I think an important thing to keep in mind is that the controller is still king, and in the XR space, making sure that controller is accessible and making sure that people do have that type of support is really critical, and that's an important thing we've been looking at. Certainly the Xbox Adaptive Controller is a great example of a supported technology that needs to be well considered in any XR solution, just to make sure that people do have all the options they need to still use the controller and have access to all those necessary engagements. So what I'd like to do just to focus on the rest of the presentation is to look at the scenarios that we have put in the OZeWAI. I won't go through all 18 scenarios due to time constraints, but what I have done is just picked out 5 that I think showcase across different disabilities and just some of the things that are worth considering when we have a look at this space. So I think a good one to start with is looking at assistive technologies more broadly. So it's really important that we make sure that functionality like navigation and the user interface are all available to assistive technologies. So in the case of a screen reader, it might be the case that we make sure that a lot of the text information is delivered, making sure that our navigation information is delivered, and that it's easy to understand the interface and get around. Needless to say, there is a lot of different assistive technologies out there, but we see that those are the key things that need to be provided to users, and developers do need to consider what device people are connecting with, what assistive technologies are in use, and just making sure that the navigation and interface information is really effective in providing that support. The next scenario I'd like to just talk about briefly is around cognitive. And while screen readers and vision impaired and blind users benefit a lot from having a lot of textual information delivered to a screen reader, for people with cognitive and intellectual disabilities, it's actually a lot better if things are put into symbols to make it easy to understand. So what we see as being an important part of the XR development for people with cognitive disability is making sure that there are functionality where complex language, complex information can be overlaid with symbols. So for example, if you're in a virtual environment and you're trying to find the toilet, rather than having descriptions about what that is, just having the universal symbols to provide that type of support. And if you can overlay that in real time, especially in augmented reality as you're walking along, then that can significantly improve not just the virtual experience, but the real world experience in replacing and transposing complex information for symbols and things that are much easier to understand. Another one that I think is really important is around screen magnification. This one's a little close to my heart as a screen magnifier user. When you are in a full immersive 360-degree environment, you can appreciate that if you zoom in on a small little part of that environment, then it's very easy to suddenly get lost. You know, if you're playing a game and you zoomed in on a dragon, you might only be able to see a scale or two or something. So it's very easy to get lost and disorientated in that type of environment. So an important part that we've mentioned in the OZeWAI is that there needs to be some sort of map so that people can understand where they are in that space and what part of that space they're currently looking at. And so to make sure that there is easy functionality to then zoom in and out and provide that support for that user. Another great scenario that XR offers is around sign language. And one of the big restrictions we have at the moment on the web and games as they stand is that there isn't a lot of support for sign language. And what's fantastic in terms of an XR environment, the potential, is that you can quite easily sign in VR or AR or mixed reality, and you could potentially have another person in that environment that can sign back. Or what we could do is have an avatar that signs, and all the information that needs to be provided to the user is sent to that avatar, and that avatar then signs all the text information, all the important information that needs to be read back to the person, importantly in their first language as sign. So XR has a lot of potential in really opening the door and making it much easier for people who do use sign language as their first language, either through communicating with an individual or something like an avatar to funnel the non-sign information that needs to be provided to the user to an avatar or something similar to that. And the last one I'd just like to cover off on is deafblind and some of the implications that could come across in the XR environment. I think what's really exciting for people who are deafblind is that when it comes to things like real-time communication, in an immersive environment, you can provide real-time communication in the form of to a braille display, more old school, or you can make use of the whole environment and sensors. You could have body suits, you could have all sorts of way to tactile convey information as it's required through that XR experience. So there's huge potential for disability groups that currently may not have as much engagement online, and the XR space has great potential. But as I was saying, the XR environment is also a bit of the Wild West at the moment, with the fact that we don't really have that consistent feature set. There's still a lot of work to be done. People are still testing the waters to figure out what can be done in this environment. So there is still some ways to go from an access perspective. So in terms of next steps and what's happening with the group, we have now had this officially presented as a draft, agreed, supported by W3C, and it will have its more formal release at CSUN in a few weeks' time. But if anyone would like to get the current copy of the OZeWAI, I've got a link, and I'm very happy to circulate this presentation, and then you'll be able to see all 18 of the use case scenarios we've presented at the moment. What would be great from a community perspective is that this is a draft. It is just a starting point, and certainly as developers embrace XR, we want to make sure that accessibility is a part of that conversation and on that radar. So what I'd really welcome from the community is for everyone to have a look at the OZeWAI, give us feedback on the scenarios. Do you believe that they are effective? What do you see as other limitations? What do you see as other things that could be put into the XR space to provide people with disability in those particular scenarios? And also, if you have more scenarios, we'd love to continue building up the list of other scenarios to ensure that there is that effective support in the XR space going forward. So basically from here, if you'd like to flick through any suggestions, and I'll make sure these slides are available so you've got the current link, and I'll keep everyone posted as to when it's officially online, if not already. So look, that's pretty much it from me. If anyone would like to get in touch, scott@hollier.info. And also tonight is actually the night where I have my weekly RQTF call. So it's at 10 p.m. this evening. Yes, if anyone does want to pass on any comments or discussion or anything at all that's sparked your interest from this presentation, then I'll be very happy to pass it on to the group this evening. If you just want to flick me an email, you can also follow me on Twitter @Scott Hollier. And again, wonderful to have OZeWAI in Perth, and great to share this. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Scott Hollier. I'm going to go and download it this afternoon. Excellent. So we have a couple of moments, I think, for any questions. If anyone does have a question, please just raise a hand and I'll get a microphone over to you as quickly as possible. Are there any burning questions? We have one from Matt. Okay, can I just check where my second microphone has gone, though? Vitya.
Sorry, two-part. Would you better read the link out so I can type it in? And also, how are you finding in your research the XR accessibility consoles working? Are they working really well, or I've only seen them once in play, but are you finding with your research that the Xbox controller's working really well?
Great question. I'll get just to make it a bit faster. David, can I trouble you to read out the URL that's on that slide there for me?
Yep. Okay. Are you ready for this?
Thank you.
Okay. http:// Oh, you can do that. raw, RAW, githack.com /W3, the number 3, C /APA / do these need to be in capital, Scott?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Okay. XAUR /XAUR /index.html.
So this is a temporary link, but yes, very soon, if not already, there'll be a real one. So when the W3C official links are sorted, I'll make sure that that's circulated.
Yeah, and if I can probably just add the comment about the Xbox. I mean, I've got an Xbox at home and I really irritate my children because I always say any new game, I want you to turn on the accessibility features. I want to see captions. I want to see narrator working. Believe it or not, narrator does actually work on the Xbox. How it works on, all the Siege games and the RPGs, I don't know. But if you've got one, find it, switch it on. Yeah, get in and explore. We have another question directly in front of you, Scott.
G'day, Scott. Andrew Lizio. Our company is developing mobile applications or a mobile application for education that has infinite zoom capability, and that's the way that they basically use the business app like a game. Is there any guidance that you could point us to make that more accessible?
Yeah, well, certainly in terms of mobile apps, WCAG applies to the development of mobile apps, so that would be a good place to start. And in terms of if your app has XR components to it, if it does it have an augmented reality side of things? Or yep. So I mean, in that certainly there's a number of resources available online about things to consider. This draft is a good thing to read through in terms of understanding some of the user cases. But look, after this, if we could swap emails, I can flick you a whole lot of resources from W3C that can provide some support for that.
Okay, one more question directly to your front again, further back.
Hi Scott, it's Matt Putland. Just got a question around devices like Samsung Gear and the mobile phone-based VR. Does that have the same potential when compared to Oculus and all the other more fancy and expensive VR tools, or is it limited in some way because it's not like a proper device?
Well, I think at this stage, at this particular time, I think there's they are quite comparable. Certainly a more budget orientated experience, but many of us have probably seen the $10 headsets that you can just clip your mobile phone in the front and then you technically have an XR device. And look, to be honest, they work pretty well. If you Bluetooth a controller on, because controller is still a really important part of it, then you do get the gesture control. You do get the integration with the controller, and that in turn can provide switch key support. So you can fairly easily and fairly cheaply turn your mobile device into a reasonably good XR device. There's lots of apps out there to provide that support. However, I think an important thing to recognise is that, whether it's the use of AR on a phone or whether it's the more expensive devices like the HTC Vive, there's still not the full support for all the inputs and outputs really needed by people with disability. And so I think that's really where we're at the moment in this space, and hopefully some of this advice will just provide guidance. But there's absolutely no reason you can't use your phones and still use them in a comparable way to some of those more expensive devices, providing you've got the controller support. And but yes, we still have a long way to go.
Cool. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Matt.
Sorry. Dr. Scott, it's me, Vidya. It's Probably. Well, thank you for a great presentation, Karen. You too. That was wonderful. Yeah, you've mentioned earlier that one component that's lacking is the spatial auditory component. It's good. It's great that you've addressed it, and hopefully, we're be able to see more development in that area. And I'm happy to chat further as well with you about it. Thank you.
No worries.
Right. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Scott Hollier. Scott will be here for the rest of the conference, so fire up all your questions. Go download the draft now and get yourself involved. Join with me in thanking Dr. Scott.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
We're just going to have a short interlude while we're working